All right, here's my affirmative, um, constructive on why marijuana should be legal. There are several arguments for why the legalization of marijuana would be very beneficial to our country as a whole. And if I can show you that the legalization for recreational use would be beneficial, then I should win this debate. As a part of my journey to win this debate, I'll be touching base on the benefits in regards to crime, health concerns, public safety, and of course, economic benefits for our country. My first main point, if you turn on the news, it's rare that we don't see some sort of drug-related violence as one of the headlines. Much of this could be reduced by legalizing marijuana, the most commonly used drug. My opponent will probably tell you that the number of prison inmates on prison inmates in jail on charges related to marijuana are less than half of a percent of the population, which may seem like a very minuscule amount. Well, according to Amanda Stevens, it is estimated that the government, of which I remind you is heavily in debt and increasingly going further in debt, every single day spends between they're going in debt every single day, but annually they spend between $7 and $10 billion, and that was just last year alone. Depending on the parole costs, is where the variance comes from. Um, that's $7 to $10 billion spent on a population in which 90% were arrested just for possession. That's like arresting everybody who wanted to have a after work beer to help wind down at the end of the day. But even though alcohol can be just as harmful, if not more dangerous when consumed, it is socially more acceptable because it is legal. This leads me to my next point about public health concerns and safety. It's hard not to argue that if we legalize marijuana for recreational use, that there would undoubtedly be an increase in the use of marijuana. However, I found a study that says different. It's kind of like that one friend we all had in high school who had those parents who always harped on them about everything and had very strict rules and were really quick to punish their kids if they broke a rule. Well, chances are that friend was probably one of the wildest of your friends because our young adults love to rebel against authority. According to the Connecticut Law Review, a study showed that states with the harshest marijuana laws have showed the most increase in use in the last decade. And for how much money and time we spend um, prosecuting and criminalizing people who use marijuana, it has not slowed down the use at all. So since people are going to use it anyways, wouldn't it be better for our public if our police force could focus less on stopping harmless marijuana possession drug charges and worry about harder drugs and more violent crimes, which put our society at a much higher risk of being in danger? I think so. If our government really has interest in saving lives, then they should consider that somebody dies every 30 seconds from alcohol-related um, causes, and that 35 million people living in there are 35 million people living with lung disease each year, and 342,000 people die each year from lung cancer, or not lung cancer, from lung disease, and that doesn't include lung cancer. So it's a huge number due to alcohol and tobacco compared to very little. There's never been anyone technically claimed to have died from marijuana itself. So with the public health in mind, I think it's hard to argue that tobacco and alcohol are not more hazardous to our health. When looking at total deaths, how can you argue the value of a life? You can't. In an article from the Rolling Stones magazine, when police officers were asked about marijuana, they related it to prohibition. Prohibition provided a lucrative business for guys like Al Capone. This is much like how marijuana provides business to the Mexican cartels. As a former agent for Homeland Security states, this is a direct quote, competition over the profits to be made from this illicit industry has led to the deaths of tens of thousands of individuals in that country, and an ever-increasing amount of violence spilling over into the United States, where the Justice Department estimates Mexican cartels now operate in more than 1,000 American cities. So, by not legalizing marijuana, we allow violent criminals to control the drug flow into our country. That's stupid. That causes tens of thousands of deaths in Mexico. So not only hurting ourselves, but we're hurting a different country because we won't legalize marijuana. And there's countless acts of violence in the U.S. between gangs and drug dealers over marijuana-related disputes, which could all be settled if we legalize it. To reiterate that cops are wasting their time on stupid possession charges in the past decade, over 7 million marijuana related arrests were made in the last decade, with 88% of that being for possession. with blacks being 4 times more likely than whites to be arrested. So people wonder why we can't break the cycle of poverty. How about we stop putting black men in jail for possession? A very stupid crime. Um, in 2010, our country spent 3.6 billion on the war on pot. That's an awful lot of money and time directed at a less harmful, less addictive drug than alcohol. I think this quote from former Seattle Chief of Police Norm Stamper really gives a fantastic idea of why we are wasting our time with marijuana charges. The chief directly states, I had arrested a 19-year-old in his parents' home for the possession of a very small quantity of marijuana and put him in the back seat of a caged police car. After having kicked down his door, recalls Stamper, while driving the prisoner to jail, he says, I realized mainly that I could have been doing real police work, but instead I'm going to be out of service for several hours, impounding the weed, impounding him, and writing arrest. Impound and narcotics reports. Writing arrest, impound, and narcotics reports. I was away from the people I had been hired to serve, and in no position to stop a reckless drunk driver from swerving all over the road, possibly killing somebody, or to respond to a burglary in response or intervene in a domestic violence situation. I think this gives my argument even more credibility of how, by not legalizing marijuana, we're putting those lives at risk by having less help for the important crimes, making response times to people in danger slower. If our country's cops are responsible for making these essentially very expensive arrests